Good afternoon, and welcome to the Outdoor Art Club presentation of The Living Walls with David Brenner. My name is Deborah Duck, and I'm working with fellow OAC Zoom team member Kate McCormick to bring you today's program. For those of you not familiar with the Outdoor Art Club, we are a nonprofit women's organization founded in 1902. The club engages in civic, cultural, and charitable work in our community. For example, in 2020, through Outdoor Art Club grants, we provided funds to the O'Hanlon Center for outdoor lighting in the center's pathways and stairs, and the Redwoods to purchase furniture for the Hospice Serenity Garden. As you know, we are using the webinar platform today. Zoom has two different functions, one for chat and the other for Q&A. Please use Q&A to send your questions to David Brenner anytime during the talk. He's reserving time at the end and welcomes your questions. At this time, I'd like to introduce McLean Bennett. McLean is a member of the Outdoor Art Club and is the program chair for today's event. Welcome, McLean.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Kate, Deborah, and the Outdoor Art Club for creating these webinars. Today, we are here with a very talented guest, David Brenner. He is the founding principal and lead designer of Habitat Horticulture. David began his journey by attaining a degree in environmental horticulture science from Cal Poly University. During this time, he took the opportunity to do an apprenticeship at the Royal Botanic Garden in London. This is the root of where David's passion for plants grew to include plants which naturally grow vertically on trees and rocks. Today, his designs are considered cutting edge. He is a pioneer in creating indoor living walls, also known as vertical walls, enhancing urban environments. What I find fascinating about his work is his desire to directly impact people's quality of life by introducing plants into their everyday environments and lives. Not only are his designs visually interesting, but the placement of each plant turns a plain wall into a poetic living art form. Some plants will grow in the springtime and change colors during fall-winter seasons. What might have been a huge billboard now provides an ecosystem. David once said about his work, "It is an escape from the hustle and bustle of the city." His work is sought after worldwide by both commercial living wall spaces and residential living walls. Luckily, all of us living in the Bay Area can easily view his work at SF MOMA and Salesforce. However, his portfolio and clients expand far beyond the Bay Area and include clients like Slack, Tishman Spear, Cisco, Westfield, Glensler, and many, many private residential clients. It is a great honor to introduce to you David Brenner. David, thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you so much for the nice introduction, McLean, and thank you guys all for joining today. This beautiful rainy day. I don't know where you're calling in from, but it's coming down out there. I'm hoping that today I can, give you a little insight into the design process that I go through when I'm designing a living wall. And I wanted to share my presentation here. I put together a little presentation kind of going through that process, and actually, this presentation made me really think about what are the key points. I do it all the time, but really writing it out. So I invite you guys to ask questions through the Q&A as well. But a little bit about me. So I was first drawn to plants from an early age. I would water my grandparents' plants when they go to Italy every year, and they had beautiful, my grandfather had beautiful cymbidiums, and that's really where I kind of felt the therapeutic effects of plants. And I, knew there was something there, and I wasn't sure what it was exactly, but I enjoyed it. And so I went on to study horticulture at Cal Poly, and also psychology. And I was trying to understand the studies that were behind that. And in fact, there were many. And I went on to later do an apprenticeship at the Royal Botanic Gardens in London, where I was working with epiphytic plants that grow naturally on trees and rock faces through their tropical nursery there. And I was just, at the same time, I saw these vertical gardens, and I was blown away that, wow, this is something you can actually do in an urban space and bring plants, with such a great impact to places where there isn't a lot of floor space. And it just has such a stark contrast to a city. So I came back to Cal Poly, and I was given this greenhouse through the botany department, the plant conservatory. And that's where I kind of started testing what we developed today, which is, our GrowTex growing medium, how we grow plants vertically. And, about 11 years ago, I started this company, Habitat Horticulture, and really trying to create these awe-inspiring spaces that are plant-centric, and especially in urban spaces. So at the foundation of that was, the psychological benefits that plants have on us, and that connection, bringing that connection to the forefront of our workspaces. There's a lot of studies out there that show that plants can reduce stress levels. They can increase our sense of well-being. I've even seen studies that say that, they enhance self-esteem, and even that you can become a friendlier person, which was surprising. Not surprising, but it was funny that was in the study. There's also this restorative effect that plants have on us. There's Kaplan, these two psychologists, found that, if you go and view something that's natural, then you can go back to whatever you're doing and be better at it, really have increased cognitive performance and be more creative. So having that kind of break has this, what they call this attention restoration theory. I'm going to share a short clip with you guys of one of my early installations. This is right on Market Street, kind of not a great area, kind of right, kind of meets the Tenderloin, very lively area. But this is a video of someone was just walking by and just felt the need to kind of say something about what we do. And this is my buddy Earl here.
My name is Earl. 2 days ago, they was setting up plants, and I didn't know what they was going to do with them. Now today, I'm walking across the street, and I'm seeing what they're doing, and it looks so beautiful across the street by having it up on the wall like that. And that's a blessing that he can actually do something like that for people to look at, and it's real good. So, and thank you for anybody out there that's listening, that you guys should do the same thing for the community. All right.
Let's see. All right, Earl, still every time I watch that, it resonates with me, and just gets to the root of why we're doing what we do, and really helping to transform the community and draw attention to plant life. So, why a living wall? There's a lot of reasons why someone might choose to put a living wall up. I feel like, it's becoming more and more trendy, and, it's not always the case where you can just, put a living wall on it. I think there really are certain walls that scream for plants. Some examples are, this is right at the UCSF Women's Hospital in San Francisco. And, knowing that there's a lot of studies that show that having view of nature can also expedite your recovery and require less pain medication. I think there's definitely a need for having garden space, and this living wall welcomes people as they come into this hospital setting, which most people don't like to be at. This is the top of the Salesforce tower. I designed 24 living columns and planters for them. And this is a space that is, one, it's a space where the employees can get away for a second and, feel something that feels, be in a space that feels kind of natural, even though, it's not natural, but you can be around a lot of plants and there's a pretty nice view as well. But also a community space where they allow nonprofits to come up there, not at this time, but I'm hoping soon, to host their events and be able to enjoy this space. This is an example at a mall in Del Amo. It's the Del Amo Fashion Center. It's in Torrance, California, which I really love this space, how it's these little terraces that kind of create these more intimate garden spaces within a mall, which that's where I would be in a mall, getting away from all the madness. But a great way to kind of recharge. Here is another example right in the heart of San Francisco, the financial district. This is the Foundry Square 3, and it's actually public open space, so anyone can walk in there. Don't let the security guard tell you otherwise. They're really friendly, and they can feel, really be encapsulated by plant life, and you can just feel that there's even a different scent to the space. There's different acoustics and temperature change, and it's I think just 10 minutes just standing in this lobby is recharging. It's actually interesting. There's two different compositions in this project where one is just very refined to feel like something you would find in nature, just 3 species, and then on the right there's this more dramatic composition. We'll get into kind of the design a little bit further down in the presentation, but I want to note that. Another great example is this sunken garden. It's actually, a basement level that, you would really just be staring at a concrete wall here. And I think it definitely has a good reason to put a living wall in this space. Or, just to have a, focal point in your backyard, or even though you've got the beautiful hills in the background, if that wasn't enough, but having kind of this striking centerpiece. So, I'm going to walk you through a little bit some of the design considerations that go through my mind when designing a living wall. A lot of these are not unique to, vertical gardening. It's, a lot of it is you'll find through any design process, but there are some unique features here. So one thing I start with is really, what is the function of this living wall? How is it contributing to the space, and what are you asking out of the wall? Is it going to be this, this dramatic backdrop or a focal point when you walk into a room? Is it going to be used for maybe food production, or is your primary focus to attract pollinators? Do you want the space to feel tranquil, inviting, or do you want to just get kind of a shock to your system? So what are you asking and out of the wall? What do you want the space to feel like? And then you look at what can you grow, because we're dealing with living organisms here, plants, and we want them to thrive, and we want to give them the best chance possible. So that it comes down to what the light exposure is, what you can grow in your USDA hardiness zone, the cold hardiness, and different exposures, different microclimates throughout the space. There might be reflective light hitting the wall. So really what's possible to grow in that area. And lighting lighting and temperature are huge there. And then I ask, who will be maintaining this? Who's the end user? Is it, Habitat Horticulture, or is it, another company, or is it if you're designing this wall for yourself, are you going to maintain it, or you're going to hire a maintenance gardener to do so? And just being kind of realistic and, aligning that with your lifestyle, and your budget too. So that's a huge one, and we'll talk a little bit more about the maintenance. But who's going to be maintaining that, and with that will dictate what kind of plant species and what kind of composition you would put in a vertical garden. And then how will be accessed? We're dealing with this little thing called gravity when we're talking about a vertical garden, and oftentimes you can't just walk up to the wall. You have to get on a ladder or a scissor lift, or ropes and swing stage 400 feet in the air. So really understanding how will you get there, and what is that process like? Then looking at the the design considerations of the composition itself. Looking at contrast, how do you create something that really has different contrasts? And I feel so lucky that I get to design with plants that there's so many unique textures and forms and leaf colors and shapes, and it's endless. And there's so many plants that I just desperately want to try, and it kind of goes back to being realistic about who's maintaining it, what's the risk factor of using something that maybe you haven't tried. But you got to keep trying always. And I always kind of dedicate 5% to 10% of new species in each living wall if the project allows for it. Dimension is another way you can also get contrast, but in a vertical plane, how far do some of these species come off the wall? In a garden setting, a horizontal garden setting, you have dimension through height, and having variations in height can really create this natural feeling and just a more welcoming space that feels natural. So dimension is a huge one, and also being able to understand how the light hits the space and how that dimension changes over time. Then you kind of look at what are the specimens and the accent plants, or what is your foundation planting? I like to ask, who are the main characters and the supporting actors of this feature film we're putting together? And having that balance right is really important. How these species are going to interact with each other over time. And I'll show you some photos soon here. Proportion is another big one. What size of wall is going to be appropriate for your space? Taking into account the growth of that and the type of species, the type of textures. Using something that has a much broader leaf can really close the space in, and is not always appropriate for the size of the space. And it's more plants is not always more. So aligning it with the space and going back to kind of what is that purpose and the feeling you're trying to get from this living wall. So here's a photo. You can see this is a close-up of the other project I recently showed. But you can see some of these species here, more foundation species. This Ficus repens, this Geranium bicovo, and then we have highlights of this Hakanakloa Japanese forest grass, one of my favorites. It does go deciduous, and something else to account for. It has kind of this weeping form, and then so it really has a contrast with color, and then you have this other kind of finer texture of this Mahonia soft caress, beautiful plant again, and that's a little bit more upright. So, using different textures of leaves, different sizes, and the variation, I think, is what is exciting. And then you have these kind of, I would say these are like the stars of the show here. The oxalis. This one is purple plum crazy. That's the one. So, and then you get a little bit of change in hue here with some of the purple of this kalanchoe, and that also has these purple flowers that kind of tie into that. So, and there's so much you can do there also with, flowering as well. So continuing on. Did you guys just see that picture? That's sometimes it's like talking to a void here. I'm not sure if anyone's out there, but I think that picture was on the screen right now. I have two screens going here.
It was perfect. Looked great.
Good to know. Thank you. Let's see. Continuing on. So another one that it's kind of hard to describe, but what is the look and feel of the wall? Is it really wild and kind of overgrown, or do you want it to be more refined and compact, and just trying to understand what the look and feel is? And I think for me, it's always anytime I design something, I always want to have a conversation with the client. It's easy for them to say, okay, here are some photos for inspiration, I like this and like that, but you get so much more out of having a conversation, or even, better meeting them, or even better, going to their house and, seeing what they have on their wall and, understanding a little bit about them. So it's so important to capture that look and feel of what they're envisioning for the space. Then, the architectural context, how does it go with the surrounding architecture? How, is it a modern minimalist space, or is it, more of a country style space? There's so many different ways you can go with that. If there are, architectural features, like I'm designing this one wall now where there's this beautiful kind of undulating chandelier going over the wall, kind of intersecting where the wall is. And so it's kind of like, well, how do you play off of that? That's kind of like maybe the first starting point. And then, do you want the wall to kind of go with that and kind of speak to that curve, or do you want to go maybe against the grain and contrast with that? So, taking the architectural context is really important. And the dynamic nature of a garden. So how does it grow over time? Probably the most beautiful part of designing a garden is that it changes. And you can do that with different flowering times. How does it change maybe color depending on what exposure it gets, and it's really exciting to see, if you, or to know that, okay, this one species, especially in a lot of succulents, they change color with more light or colder temperatures, and kind of planning for that and seeing how the garden does, and over time with those more what are they, like how the natural elements affect the plants. Movement is another one that is really exciting. You can bring in grasses to have this kind of sense of movement, or more delicate ferns as just a little bit of wind hits the wall, and I think that's one of the more dramatic parts of a vertical garden. And then how will it change from year 1 to 5? Because it's growing, things are getting coming off the wall, especially if you're not paying attention to pruning, and maybe that's what you want it to do. But a lot of kind of the perennials that we use, 1 to 5 years is, I would say, like 5 years is like their a lot of things can continue to grow, but we kind of plan things are going to get kind of leggy over time, and they might need either to be replaced or really cut back hard. So that's kind of the time frame I designed for. And then lastly, like the repetition and the balance, and how do you make this kind of cohesiveness to the installation? All right, well, I'm going to kind of go through a couple case studies, if you will, but this is this project. It was actually taken down because they put a building right in front of it, but it was right on First and Harrison. And these are two like towering living walls. They're actually, I think this is like the highest living wall was the highest living wall in the country, about 100 feet at the top there. The windiest hill in San Francisco, and these really narrow pieces. To me, the first thing was like, okay, it's windy. How do you kind of design for that with the hardiness of the plants, but also kind of showcase that with the type of species? And there's these grasses that kind of move throughout the wall. And this is when it was really young, but when they came out, it was really beautiful to see how the wind picked it up, and it just kind of moved up through the wall. I was inspired also by Ned Kahn's installation at the the Federal Building, with those little flickering pieces that the wind would hit, and it would just kind of almost light up and make these kind of rippling designs. And also kind of capturing that verticality of this kind of movement up this wall. And so here's the composition for that living wall. But a lot of times, something more subdued is what the client wants, and something that just feels like it was you're walking through the forest. And this is a much more refined palette for a client in Los Altos. And the backdrop species is Pilea depressa, really fine leaf texture, green, and have a more medium green. And then you have these ferns that are just kind of dappled throughout, and just two species. But at the bottom, actually, there are a few more herbs and things that could be harvested, and edibles that the client requested. So that's going back to the functionality and kind of what are we asking for this wall. And this is right in the middle of their living room. So they want to feel calm, and shades of green do that. On the contrary, this is a very kind of striking composition, you could say, and this was actually part of the Oakland public art requirement for this building. So it kind of had to stand on its own as a piece of art. And you turn this corner and you're kind of hit with this vibrant composition. Really kind of, it was supposed to speak to the diversity of Oakland, and kind of the melding of all these different cultures. The way the composition moved, kind of jumped to different places on the composition or throughout the wall. There's also orchids in there to kind of have these little pops of color. But this one, was very vibrant. And so I typically design, I create these compositions that are a little bit more illustrative. You have to use your imagination a little bit. They help me design by putting in the different textures and the colors. And it's more it's an artistic rendition of what it's going to be. So I think it's really hard to kind of render plants perfectly, and it never is exact. So I've really enjoyed doing it like this way. And I sometimes I'll go a step further, and we'll produce renderings of what this is, because it doesn't always speak to everyone. But here's another example of just kind of the style that I design with. But you can do it with on the computer in CAD, and everyone works a different way in how they visualize things. But this is just how I found it to be not only just effective, but I feel like it's therapeutic just to kind of go through this process as well. Here's another example of, this is in Westfield and Los Angeles. And here you have kind of like this band of red swath that's more like the focal point there. And you have this kind of movement going through the wall, which you see a lot of, kind of like this diagonal patterning on a living wall. And I always wondered why that was. And I think it's mostly because, if it was vertical or if it was horizontal, it might feel, it doesn't feel as natural. You don't see that so much, in nature. Things kind of move in their own way. This is another composition in Los Angeles where, it was for this project, it was like, okay, well, how do we tie this into this art piece that was across the way? And also, I don't know, after talking with the client, it was like having it feel kind of natural in the movements, and there's the composition that kind of weaves in and out as well. And I find myself I prefer designing things that feel more natural than not. I mean, it is a vertical garden, but sometimes the client would like something that is more geometric, or really sometimes the logo within the wall, and you got to do what they want. At the end of the day. So going back to this one, yeah. So looking at this, most of the species are about, the dimension is the same. A lot of this contrast is done with color, and then the focal point here really, there's the purple, but there's also these butterflies that were planned to be put in there, and it's kind of could be something sculptural, that the living wall plays off of. This is a project that was in Bay Meadows. And you can see here, there's a lot of different flowers, and it changes throughout the season, and purples and whites and reds, and it was meant to attract pollinators as well. And also it was a pretty windy site, so bringing in some grasses to kind of get that sense of movement. This is a living wall for Cal Poly plant conservatory that I kind of got started at. They ended up tearing it down for some construction, building new offices there, not offices, new classrooms. And then they rebuilt this plant conservatory that's like state of the art. And so Habitat Horticulture donated this new living wall to the conservatory, because it felt like, I felt really grateful, as it was kind of my starting point there. So we went down there and helped the students plant the living wall, and they're maintaining it as well. So you have to think, okay, well, how do you, leave this in the hands of students? Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, it's in good hands, but, so making, it's also full sun. So it's a palette that's really robust. It's, mostly succulents that can tolerate, drying out if something does happen to the irrigation system. The composition is such that it can be changed a little bit. I'm laughing because I'm remembering being down there, and they were joking that this was like a psychedelic trip by, like, I went to the desert and did all these psychedelics and designed this thing, which I didn't, but I could see where they're going, where they're coming from, looking back at it, as they were kind of, I came later as they were almost done anyways. So here's a photo of it when it was, this is on the left, it's pretty recent. On the right was kind of when it was just a few weeks planted. And yeah, so it's growing in nicely, and you really get the vibrancy with this Aeonium kiwi is the name. I'll go through this. I don't know if everyone's still with me out there, but I'll go through the SF MOMA project a little bit as some other examples of that process as well. Oops. 1 second.
Yes, David, we're still with you, and it's looking fantastic.
Thanks.
I love it.
Let's see.
The colors are so vibrant.
Why can't I find this from current slide? Where's you? Oh, that's why it's hiding. Okay, back to the show here. So SF MOMA, this was a project that we worked on early on with Snow Hedda, who was the architect for the project, and EHDD was architect of record. And it was great because we got to work 2 years in advance. So how do we really bring this wall to life and make it thrive in the space and understand the challenges? It was designed to really create this space where people can step away from the traditional art galleries and be around something that feels natural, because art fatigue is a real thing. And I think it does exactly that. You walk out on the 3rd floor terrace here, and it's just so calm. It's like, especially when there's no one there, that's when I like to go. But even when there's people and it's crowded, it's just the temperature is a little bit cooler. That it's kind of like this cozy place though, and all the different shades of green. And the acoustics are very intimate, and you see just like with a little bit of wind that hits the ferns, and this wall is like animated. It was meant to feel like you would find, like if you were walking through Mount Tamalpais, which I'm sure a lot of you on the call know real well. And a lot of the species were pulled, not literally, but native species to that region, with mostly different shades of green, and just really different hues and textures were what makes it interesting. And then there's like some seasonal surprises of flowers throughout, kind of just tucked in there with a few different species. So some of the considerations here were the regional context. How do you find a space that emulates that in nature? Light regions, as light is the most important part of this puzzle here. Plant profiles, color and texture, and how the light hits the space, which is the sun angles. So we really studied the light as best as we could. We got really good light studies from the lighting engineer, and we're able to really determine that, okay, this wall is in deep shade. So we have to use species that can tolerate deep shade, especially in the wintertime when it really doesn't get any natural light, any direct light. So there was one region on the left side that gets blasted in the end of the day, and that had to kind of go with the rest of the design too, and have this cohesiveness. And so how do you do that? Using species that can tolerate different extreme full sun with lower light conditions as well. And looking at kind of where the angle is from the sun. So, as you're bringing things in that have a lot of dimension, because when you have this, massive canvas to work with, so you should take advantage of that using species that can get big. But how does that affect the light coming in as well? And where's the light coming from? So the way that the design was created was to kind of allow for that light to come through. We did a mock-up, kind of tested the different plant species that would work under these low light conditions. We replicated that with actually shade cloth, and we even tried, what could we grow there? We're looking at, okay, so maybe mushrooms would work. They did in fact work. Those were some oyster mushrooms, native mushroom, and turkey tails. But over time, it got a little slimy, so we ended up not doing that. Looking at the regional context, actually found a spot in the East Bay that was similar light exposure, where it was south facing, which you'd think gets a lot of light, but it was shaded most of the day by in this case it was in this corridor. And then, with the plant profiles, one thing to consider on a vertical plane is, if you have something that really comes out with a lot of dimension, then something underneath it is going to be potentially shaded out. So there's almost like this hierarchy where you have, you go from the large to the medium to the small as you design. So a lot of the native species that we used, are, was like different shades of hue and using color and texture, as I mentioned before. A lot of ferns, and here's the composition. In this case, it was presented a little bit differently, but it was really kind of very chopped up because I wanted it to feel like something you would find in nature that doesn't have these kind of long bands of this, and as it changes throughout, it does so gradually. There's about 40 species total too, so very diverse. This is how we typically put the composition on the wall, so we know exactly where the plants go. Sometimes we project it. In this case, we projected it, so it was very accurate. And then came time for planting, and we plant within this GrowTex material that we developed. That basically it's like a pocket for the plants, and the plants will grow within that material, and eventually becomes more of a hydroponic system. And the irrigation is within the wall and drips down and saturates the plant's roots. And this is when it was first planted, and about 6 months later, this is what it looked like. And now it's, some of these ferns, these like polypodium blue star ferns, are massive now coming out. And it's really neat to see how, things change over time and, adapt to the space. And in this case, it was such a great spot for a living wall because you would have literally looked out at this concrete wall here, which it doesn't look bad next to the wall, but we need, I think, something there. And so very lush. This is something that you couldn't do in every application. You have to really look at the light, but look at kind of where you're planting too. So we do a lot of projects in Los Angeles and Southern California, and it, that type of sun is just so different. It just beats down on these plants. So you have to be really careful about what species you use and how do those species, how are they affected by the sun? A lot of times they're kind of pruned by the sun, and they don't get so big and leggy. So other factors that I'm not going to go into too much, but how do you make a living wall successful? And for any installation, what you should be looking at, is drainage. Like, where's the water going to go? Because eventually it has to go somewhere. There has to be, usually there is some runoff off that wall. So even in a garden setting, it's like, okay, what's underneath it? If you're going to drain to the landscape, making sure that can tolerate a little bit more water, and asking, do you want to recirculate this water? Is it worth it? Do you have enough water savings there to justify adding, a pump system that can be a little bit less reliable sometimes? How are you going to get a water supply there? Do you need one? If the wall is not that large, and the species are aligned for periods of drought, then maybe it's okay to just hand water it. Rarely will I say that. Electrical, you need to power the valves to power the you need to power the controller that powers the valves. Waterproofing should always be considered as you're kind of attaching to a structure. What is the potential for water intrusion to that existing facade, and if it can't tolerate the moisture, then making sure that it is waterproofed. Access, we talked a little bit about that, but what's it like on day one when you're installing it, and then what is it kind of on the long-term maintenance of that? A lot of times, we'll put up scaffolding on day one, and then we'll use a lift, after that. Lighting, sorry, this is getting kind of redundant, I know, but lighting, where is the light coming from? Is it natural light? And if you can't get that natural light, oftentimes we'll bring in supplemental fixtures, supplemental electric lighting, and that can help grow the plants, even in a basement or even like a dungeon or wherever you're going to have your living wall. Plant selection, after all this, it really comes down to the species that you choose for the particular space. So going back to what you can grow there. And lastly, just having fail safes. We always have fail safes just in case someone shuts off the water, which does happen. How do you get how do you get a notification, or what is the backup plan there to make sure that, really water is the limiting factor there. So this is kind of a schematic of the system that we use and developed, but we have to look at the water is going to usually be collected at the base of the wall, and then where does that water go? We like to have some kind of trough that collects that, and then we can determine if it's going to go to a planter or a garden or the drain, or if it's going to go to a tank and be recirculated. Here's just a quick example. How are we doing on time, by the way? Just looks like
we have about 10 minutes to go.
Okay, I'm going to flip through some of this because I think we don't have much time here. Maintenance, again, so just looking at kind of, the schedule and the access plan, aligning the plant palette with the maintenance regime there as well. Some plants are more low maintenance than others. The composition, if you're, some compositions will lend itself to having lots of maintenance because they have to be kind of kept within their, more defined lines, where other times, you can let it get wild. Let's see, what else? We'll skip that. I think I have a few more slides here I want to get to. So here's another example of how to get to the wall. We use ropes on some cases, or we're on top of the wall using a swing stage. Or that's for this project that was really tall. Okay, I'm going to zoom through this because I know we only have about 12 more minutes here. I want to answer some questions. So, there's lots of different systems out there. And so it's important to kind of look at, what, each one has its kind of own application, but I feel like there's so many out there, I can't keep track of them all. And, making sure you find the one that works for you. And I think it's really about, knowing how to use that system. And, there's some that are more vertical planters that are stacked, or, vertical, more of these pre-planted panels, or this is like a tray system that kind of just, you put the pots in there, and so many systems out there. So do your research, find some that work for you, or make your own, which you can definitely do using, gutters, or I've seen, like crates, so many different unique applications out there for DIY vertical gardens. These are ammunition boxes, kind of cool. I really love this method too for succulent living walls, and be able to, just fill up this frame with a little chicken wire, and you put the succulents on the top, you let it get rooted, and within a few weeks you'll have this beautiful densely packed living wall, mostly with these little sempervivum echeveria succulents. And lastly, I would be foolish if I didn't mention that we have this new product out called Gromeo that you can actually send it with plants. That's an option. So it's fully planted, kind of ready to hang. And that's one option too, one of the many out there. We recently launched that during the pandemic, just we didn't know what we were going to do the next day or next year. So it's called Gromeo, and I actually put together a discount code for you guys if anyone is interested in that. And that's all I got for you guys, and I want to hear some questions. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, David. I want to start by really just saying thank you so much for presenting and giving us a minute to look at your beautiful work. So the first question I have from the audience is, can we get the address of the walls in San Francisco?
Yeah, the ones that are public, we can definitely send that your way. We'll follow up with that.
That's great. So beautiful and inspiring. Can you please share how the live dirt does not smell moldy inside?
Well, I mean, dirt, well, one, I mean, what we typically use is not really like dirt that you find in your garden. It's more a peat-light mix, and then that will eventually break down. And so it doesn't have a moldy smell to it at all. But one of the reasons, we use synthetic material is that it doesn't break down and it doesn't mold. So, and even soil shouldn't really mold if it was properly hydrated and it's draining. So that's my answer for that one.
Okay, sounds good. Do you have any suggestions for doing a living wall that grows downwards to hide a cement block retaining wall? I believe it opens to open space and is sunny in summer.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far down, but there's definitely species that are kind of weeping and pendulous that you can use, and some even like certain vine species will, without kind of the option to grow up, they might grow down, and they can grow, even like 10 to 20 feet down if you let them.
Okay. What considerations regarding light and lighting? For example, shading of one plant selection by another section. Also, level of artificial lights, as well as any natural light.
Yeah, so we talked a little about the sun angles and where the sun's coming from. That's always a consideration, but also how the species might block that sun. So, if it really doesn't get that much light, you might want to think, should we have this really big species in there? And then also looking at supplemental lighting and just knowing what you're trying to grow and how many foot candles you would need to get there, and then kind of balancing that with what you might get from the natural light, if any.
Well, here's an interesting question just for you. These living walls are so beautiful. What is a good way for people to find living wall consultants who can help them to choose proper spaces and specific plants and grasses that would suit them best?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few of us out there. So, I would, Google living walls and find one that works for you.
Yeah. Well, and you.
Yeah. I mean, interview a few of them.
Yeah. How did these large wall pieces get watered?
So typically there's an automatic irrigation system that is, similar to your landscape irrigation system with a few more bells and whistles, but it ends up saturating the growing medium, the Grow-Tex, and but every system is different and how that's administered, but typically it's automated.
Yeah. What are your primary sources, like book, websites, catalogs, when choosing plants for your projects? And your primary resources when actually sourcing the plants?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly, learning and, trying to get, I mean, there's a lot out there on the internet of, opinions and of what species do well. I start, if I don't know the plant myself, I'll start there, and also kind of reference some other. I have a lot of plant books, that are very species specific or family specific, and then learning from what we've done, and kind of bringing it full circle as well. So most of the time when I design, I'm talking to after I'm having a conversation with our maintenance team to be like, okay, what do you they're going to be the ones ending up maintaining it. So how do I make something that's going to thrive? And if they have comments on something that I've used in the past that doesn't work, definitely going to take that into consideration.
Nice. I'm going to skip the next question. If there's any personal questions, we can make sure that David gets in touch with you directly. Can anyone see the Cal Poly installation? So I believe everyone see it. Is it open to the public?
Yeah, sure. You can drive right on campus, and I think I can follow up with the location on that too. It's not open yet. I think it's still a construction site, so a few more months, I think, but definitely when it's ready.
How do you assemble the wall? Chicken wire, or is it a wooden frame?
Yeah, I think maybe she's referring to the succulent slides I was showing. There's some good DIY stuff out there. I would just search succulent living wall DIY, and I'm sure you'll be on your way.
Yeah, I've seen some beautiful ones, even like wreaths that people have done. So yeah, I'm sure there's some good sources out there for that. Also curious if there's an average template for how often these walls need tending. I don't think David, oh, sorry. Forget the ending part. I guess the real question is there an average template for how often these walls need tending?
Not really. I mean, some installations kind of are quarterly. Sometimes, I mean, that really tall one I was sharing, that was like once every year and a half. But typically, we like to come, weekly if we can, just to make, if the client has that expectation of like, they don't want every leaf to look perfect, but it really depends on the client's expectations, the budget, and the plant palette.
Yeah. My understanding is that the living roof of the Academy of Science wasn't all that successful. Yet, your living walls have been quite successful. Why?
I mean, I think the living roof, it's gone through phases, and a lot of it comes down to the maintenance and getting it established. I think last time I saw it looked really good, but I think it's the same. It really comes down to, especially like the first year of getting the plants established and used to that environment, and then onwards of like understanding how to manage pest and disease, which is common in every garden, and then also the irrigation and making sure that's dialed in.
So we have time for one more question, so I'm going to just throw in a couple. What is the common waterproofing material? And I'm going to add in, can you install a living wall in a bedroom on a second floor? So that's where we're going to end it.
Yeah, you can definitely install a living wall in a bedroom, second floor. Again, looking at kind of how to get water to and from. What was the first part of the question?
Yeah, a common waterproofing material.
Yeah, so there's a lot out there. I would look at like Gracie products. They have, depending on what you're attaching to, they've got a lot of options. Gracie, Grace.
No, that's great. Well, I want to just say again, thank you to everyone in the audience, and especially to David for presenting today. I also really just want to thank you for being so flexible. I know we were supposed to do this live last May, and you've waited and been so patient and now are presenting for us. And I just couldn't be more thankful for your flexibility. I would also like to add that in the, I believe it's in the chat room, you'll be able to find sorry about that. You'll be able to find both his website, habitathorticulture.com, and there's the Gromio, I believe it's a discount code that is set up. So once again, that's under the chat for everyone. There's a 15% off.
I just wanted to say thank you guys all for listening. And McLean, thank you for having me. That was a lot of fun. And, you know, please direct the other questions to me and I'll try to get them answered. So thank you all.
Yes, we will do that. No problem. I want to go over the upcoming events that are taking place. On March 25th, 1 week from today at 1 p.m., Adam Ratner of the Marine Mammal Center will speak on caring for our oceans. On April 1st at 1 p.m., Diana Williams, who founded Prison to Employment Connection, will inform us about the program and how it helps inmates in San Quentin transition to employment on their release. This webinar will include two former inmates will also offer their perspective.